A court in Vietnam has upheld a death sentence for a real estate tycoon, Truong My Lan, after rejecting her appeal against.
It's 10 a.m. here on the East Coast. It's 9 p.m. in Vietnam, where we are tracking a developing story. A real estate tycoon was sentenced to death for her role in one of the...
This is the story of Truong My Lan, a Vietnamese billionaire who pulled off what prosecutors call the largest bank fraud in world history. Her scheme was so audacious, so massive, that it shook an entire nation's financial system.
To Vietnam, where a property tycoon has been sentenced to death in the country's biggest ever financial fraud case. Truong My Lan was one of 85 people on trial for embezzling $12.5 billion. The death sentence is seen as go either unnoticed or unchallenged. For how long?
The case took place around 2012, so it has been going on for about 10 years. And I'm sure...
To understand the scale, if this happened in America, it would be equivalent to stealing $1.6 trillion. But Truong My Lan's story didn't start in boardrooms or banks.
A court in Vietnam has upheld the death sentence for property tycoon Truong My Lan in the country's largest ever case of financial fraud, and what could be also one of the world's largest cases of bank fraud.
In the 1980s, Lan was selling cosmetics and household goods at a market stall in Ho Chi Minh City. Through shrewd investments in real estate during Vietnam's economic liberalization, she built what would become the country's biggest property empire. But building an empire wasn't enough. Lan had her sights set on something much bigger and much more illegal.
But Vietnam is still in the middle of a very long, 8-year-long now, campaign against corruption called Burning Furnaces. The Communist Party has led it because of their fear that the pervasive corruption in the country was hammering its legitimacy. We've seen...
The media report also said it is possible the sentence could be commuted to life imprisonment if Lan can return 3/4 of the money embezzled while on death row. The case is part of a years-long crackdown on corruption in a campaign.
Viet law strictly limits bank ownership to 5%, but Lan found a way around this. She secretly controlled 91.5% of Saigon Commercial Bank through 73 different proxy shareholders. It was an elaborate shell game that fooled regulators for years.
Vietnamese real estate tycoon Truong My Lan has been sentenced to death after being convicted of embezzlement, bribery, and banking regulation violations in what has been described as the country's biggest fraud case.
With control of the bank secured, Lan created an intricate web of over 1,000 ghost companies. These phantom businesses existed for one purpose: to justify massive loans that went straight back to her real estate empire.
The judges were in no mood for leniency, said there was no basis to her appeal. But remember, under Vietnamese law, under this particular charge of embezzlement, if she can pay back 75% of what she's stolen or has taken, then her...
The cash withdrawals were staggering in their brazenness. Between 2019 and 2022, Lan's driver loaded $4.6 billion in cash into SUVs, making regular trips to drain the bank's vaults.
Sentence would automatically be commuted. Now that, of course, means she's now in a race to raise that money by selling off properties, selling off stakes in companies. It's a huge sum of money in order to hit that target before her execution gets carried out.
For an entire decade, this systematic looting continued. Lan generated 2,500 fake loans, each one documented and approved through her network of complicit bank officials.
Of the whole banking system, she bribed them, gave him $500,000, and she gave the chief inspector of the banking system in the South perhaps around $5 million.
Lan's protection came from the very top. Her patron was the Communist Party chief of Ho Chi Minh City, giving her political cover that made her seem untouchable.
through hundreds of shell companies. The court heard that Lan paid a bribe of more than $5 million to senior central bank inspectors. Lawyers for Lan can lodge an appeal. Vietnam has emerged as a global business hub.
When bank inspectors came knocking, Lan was ready. She paid $5.2 million in bribes to Inspection Director Do Thi Nhan, ensuring that red flags were ignored and investigations were derailed. But Lan wasn't content with just draining the bank. She expanded her scheme to target ordinary Vietnamese citizens through a massive bond fraud.
Real estate brands in Vietnam, Bank Takeover Holdings Group. Losses stemming from the fraud case has been estimated at $27 billion US, according to the court. Lan was also involved in the issuance of fraudulent bonds to more than 40,000 private investors across Vietnam.
Using 25 fictitious bond codes, Lan's companies sold worthless investment products to 42,000 victims. Many were ordinary families who invested their life savings, believing they were buying legitimate government-backed securities.
People are victims of the scam. Nguyen Thi Ngoc Han says staff at the bank convinced her to buy corporate bonds. She didn't know these bonds were linked to shell companies owned by Lan. Now, after working in a cigarette factory and as a street vendor for decades, she says she has lost her life savings of nearly $30,000.
The human cost of Lan's greed became devastatingly clear. Families who had trusted their savings to her companies found themselves facing poverty and ruin.
On the streets of Ho Chi Minh City this week, a rare protest. Dozens of people gathered outside a branch of the Saigon Commercial Bank. Give us back our money, they chant. They are just some of the victims caught up in Vietnam's biggest financial scandal.
By 2022, the scheme was unraveling. Vietnam's anti-corruption campaign, called Burning Furnaces, was targeting high-level officials, and Lan's political patron had retired, leaving her exposed.
Criminals like her. So it's not quite, it's not unpredicted, but it's, I believe it's going to be commuted. But they want to give her a very heavy sentence so that she is willing to give up the information about.
When authorities finally moved against Lan, the impact on Vietnam's financial system was immediate and catastrophic.
A court in Vietnam upheld a death sentence for real estate tycoon Truong My Lan on Tuesday. Lan was sentenced to death in April for her role in what was Vietnam's biggest financial fraud case on record. She had appealed against a conviction for embezzlement and bribery in the high-profile $12.5 billion case. But the High People's Court determined there was no basis to reduce.
News of her arrest triggered a bank run as panicked depositors rushed to withdraw their money from Saigon Commercial Bank. The Vietnamese government was forced to step in to prevent a complete collapse of confidence in the banking system.
Within 7 days, she also can repay at least 75% of the $12 billion that was judged to have embezzled, and her death sentence would be commuted to life imprisonment. Apart from this death sentence, Lan was also handed a life sentence at a separate trial in October after being found guilty of money laundering.
The total damage was staggering: $27 billion in losses to Vietnam's financial system. But Lan didn't act alone. Her web of corruption reached into the highest levels of Vietnamese society.
1,000 business entities under the VTP umbrella. Prosecutors said they were used to funnel the loans. Thursday's verdict does not address the losses of around 42,000 victims who invested in fraudulent products. Investigators say Lan will face additional charges in a separate trial still pending.
Embezzlement, bribery, and violations of banking rules. After the 5-week trial, 85 others were also sentenced on similar charges. The case is part of a national corruption crackdown led by the Communist Party of Vietnam.
The trial revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. 85 other defendants were convicted, including bank executives, government officials, and family members who helped orchestrate the fraud.
And courted foreign investment, positioning itself as an alternative to China for foreign companies wanting to manufacture in Asia. But experts say cases like this can affect the willingness of corporations to do business here.
So right now, with this situation, you're having both an economic risk, market risk, and government risk at the same time, right? Because of the regulating bodies didn't regulate the banks.
In April 2024, a Vietnamese court delivered an unprecedented verdict: death by lethal injection. It was the first time in Vietnamese history that someone had been sentenced to death for a financial crime.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that, and I think the authorities want it to be seen that way. It is a bit of a shock to the system, even in a country where there have been a lot of scandals, lots of companies being hammered by corruption. This one really stood out. I mean, Truong My Lan essentially turned the country's fifth biggest lender into her own personal piggy bank. You're not supposed under Vietnamese law to be able to control more than 5% of a bank, but she managed.
But Vietnamese law offers Lan a way out. If she can repay 75% of what she stole, roughly $9 billion, her death sentence can be commuted to life in prison.
On Saigon Joint Stock Commercial Bank, which was at the centre of the fraud and largely owned by Lan through her proxies. Apart from the death sentence, Lan was handed a life sentence at a separate trial in October. She was found guilty of obtaining property by fraud, money laundering and illegal cross-border money transfer.
A court in Vietnam has upheld the death sentence for property tycoon Truong My Lan in the country's largest ever case of financial fraud, and what could be also one of the world's largest cases of bank fraud. Judges rejected her appeal against a conviction for embezzlement and bribery, as CNA's Tungo reports.
In December 2024, Vietnam's highest court rejected her appeal, upholding the death sentence. Now, Lan faces a race against time to liquidate her assets and repay the money. The question remains, can someone who spent a decade hiding assets and creating shell companies now suddenly produce $9 billion in legitimate funds?
So how was she found out in the end, given that she had this such a widespread network of corruption?
Well, basically, everyone who does business in Vietnam has to try to evade the laws or violate the law in some ways.
Lan's lawyers claim she's working to sell properties and recover funds, but many of her assets are tied up in complex legal proceedings. Real estate markets move slowly, and liquidating billions in property takes time she may not have. Meanwhile, the victims continue to wait for justice. Many of the 42,000 people who lost money in her bond scheme have received nothing back. For Vietnam, the case represents both a reckoning with corruption and a test of its legal system. Can a country known for protecting its elite actually execute one of its most powerful business leaders? The international financial community is watching closely. If Lan can buy her way out of a death sentence, it raises questions about whether true justice is possible when the wealthy can literally purchase their freedom. As of today, Truong My Lan sits on death row, frantically trying to liquidate a property empire built on fraud. She has pulled off the biggest bank heist in history, but her final trick may be the most audacious yet. Can she buy her way out of death row? The clock is ticking, and the whole world is watching to see if money really can buy anything, even life itself.